Congressman Heck is listed first on the ballot. He answers first under the league rules. Congressman Heck, you have 90 seconds.
Well, thank you, Jim, and thank you to the League of Women Voters, and certainly thank you to the Spokesman-Review for their sponsorship of this important event. I am running for Lieutenant Governor, and I'm offering myself as a candidate with a unique depth and breadth of life experiences and qualifications that can be brought to bear on this important office. These include having been elected to the State House of Representatives for 5 terms and served as Majority Leader, as my colleagues asked me to while I was in service there. I also served as Chief of Staff to Governor Booth Gardner. In that capacity, I was the Chief Operating Officer for all of state government. Major agency cabinet directors were direct reports to me then. After that, after Governor Gardner retired, I co-founded and was the longtime first CEO of TVW, your very favorite statewide public affairs network. And then I entered the private for-profit world, and I co-founded a company with 2 employees, which we built up to more than 300 employees over time. And finally, of course, I was elected to 4 terms in the United States House of Representatives from Washington State's brand new 10th Congressional District. These last 8 years, it's been an incredible honor. These job experiences, these qualifications will need to be brought to bear in the January 21 legislative session as we confront the serious triple crises and challenges of the COVID pandemic and the economic recession, and of course, the budget shortfall. And I'm looking forward to your questions tonight, and thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Congressman Heck. Senator Liias, 90 seconds to answer the same question, which is, what makes you the best candidate to be Lieutenant Governor for the next 4 years?
Well, thanks so much, Jim, and thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this debate, and congrats on a 100-year anniversary, both of the League and of women's suffrage this year in 2020. I'm Marko Liias, a lifelong Washingtonian, state senator, and a college professor running to be our next lieutenant governor. Growing up here in Snohomish County, my dad was a carpenter and my mom was a school lunch lady. I was the first in my family to go to college, and after I graduated, I came home and started a small construction company building energy-efficient homes with my dad. Fast forward to today, I have the honor of representing the neighborhoods I grew up in as a state senator. I think what qualifies me most is, as a lifelong Washingtonian, as a policymaker, I've always put working families and people first. I've helped advance the most bold, progressive, paid family and medical leave program in the nation, helped reduce our carbon emissions by investing in transit and passing 100% clean energy law. And we've lifted up everybody in the state along the way, passing an ambitious new college funding plan and new supports to our undocumented students and dreamers to achieve all that we have. I'm excited at the opportunities that lie ahead as our Lieutenant Governor. I want to focus in on ensuring that we're addressing the COVID recovery in a way that lifts everybody up, that we're helping small businesses and families in every corner of our state, that we're putting regular people first, not the big special interests, but regular Washingtonians. That's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. That's what I'm excited to do in this role, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, gentlemen. Now, continuing on that theme and giving you a chance to expand a little bit, as we shift to the question, back and forth questions where you'll have 60 seconds to answer, and the first candidate will have a chance to rebut. We go to Senator Liias, and can you specifically tell us what your priorities would be for the next 4 years should you be elected?
I think it's hard to predict what will happen over the next 4 years, but I'll say immediately upon taking office, my first priority is COVID-19 recovery and response. We've got to ensure that we are helping families and small businesses who are struggling in this moment, and we have to build our economy back better than it was before the crisis. Not just an economy that works for the millionaires and the billionaires and the big corporation, an economy that works for every single Washingtonian. That means universal health care so that everybody has access to the care they need when they need it. And it means continuing to make education as widely available and accessible as possible. Universal early learning, quality K-12 public schools, and a higher education system that is helping retrain and train the best workers in the world in this economy. Those will be my priorities in the first few years, and we'll see where the economy and where the state goes from there.
Congressman Heck, what would your specific priorities be for the next 4 years should you be elected?
Well, again, Jim, in the upcoming legislative session, everybody's priority ought to be dealing with the COVID pandemic and continuing to allow, as Governor Inslee has, science and data drive our solutions, and the economic recovery, which the state must participate in, doing it in a way that more broadly shares prosperity, and of course, taking care of the budget shortfall. It's imperative that we protect the vulnerable and that we protect those institutions that will help our state grow. And that would include, of course, higher education, as we attempt to skill up the 1 in 4 people who have lost their jobs and aren't getting them back. Now, above and beyond that, we have two other, I think, moral imperatives. One, finally to take action on climate change. Our state's been burning up. 5 weeks ago today, there were twice as many acres burned in this state as in all of 2019. It's time we act. And secondly, it's far past time we move the needle on the issue of racial justice. If we've learned nothing in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder, it is that the time to act is now.
Thank you. Senator Liias, you have 30 seconds to rebut anything that Congressman Heck said in his statement.
Well, I agree that COVID-19 recovery is front and center, and I would just challenge Congressman Heck and all of our members of Congress to get their acting gear and get us relief and assistance right now. We've seen, because of disagreements between the House Speaker and the White House, another bailout package, another assistance package fade away. We need help on the ground. We've got families and businesses that are struggling in this moment. We can't wait till January. We need Congress to act right now, asking him and all of our delegation to get that done.
All right, Congressman Heck, data show that people in low and middle incomes in Washington state pay substantially more in state and local property tax and sales taxes as a share of their income than people in the top 1%, making Washington's tax structure the most regressive in the nation by some standards. What, if any, measures would you support to correct this?
Well, you're right. It is the tragic truth year in and year out that Washington state is deemed to have the most regressive tax structure in the country. And in this upcoming legislative session, when new revenues will be needed in all likelihood, but not certain yet, we shouldn't enact anything that doesn't make our system less regressive. Now, the truth of the matter is, Jim, that there are any number of revenue sources that would help do that. And they've been talked about amply in the public. The trick, I think, here is not to lock in on one and say it must be this one, but to lock in on the standard. We're not going there unless our system is rendered less regressive by whatever combination of revenue sources we would enact. And by the way, this isn't a new battle for me. When I was in the State House of Representatives, I served on Governor Spellman's Tax Advisory Council and actually advocated tax reform before the State House and was the prime sponsor of a constitutional amendment to do just that. It is long overdue.
Senator Liias, same question. Washington has, by some standards, the most regressive tax system in the nation. What measures, if any, would you support to correct this?
Well, I think we've got to talk about two things. First, we've got to raise taxes on the wealthiest Washingtonians who aren't contributing their fair share. And there's a number of measures to accomplish that, and I support those. But we've also got to talk about how we reduce the tax burden on our lowest income Washingtonians. It's why I supported increasing the senior property tax exemption threshold so that our seniors who are paying property taxes aren't taxed out of their homes. And we hadn't adjusted those income thresholds in years. Now, tens of thousands more seniors qualify for that exemption. We've also got to pass the Working Families Tax Credit to help ensure that those struggling to join the middle class aren't getting taxed out of that opportunity as they move forward. We've also got to be candid about big business tax loopholes. I'm really proud to have led the fight to close big business tax loopholes that are part of the problem. And if the Boeing company is going to move our jobs to South Carolina, then their tax breaks better be on the table. We need to be ensuring that big companies and big businesses are doing their fair share.
Congressman Heck, you get 30 seconds to rebut or rejoinder on anything that your opponent just said there.
I think I pretty much said my piece on the necessity to have a system that is fair on people, and that I have a decades-long record of advocating just for such things. And that would include my time in the United States Congress when I adamantly opposed President Trump's tax cut, 83% of the benefits of which went to the top 1% of all people. Our tax system at the federal level and at the state level is upside down.
I'm going to call an audible here just to get a quick yes or no answers on a couple of things. Congressman Heck, would you favor a capital gains tax?
Yes.
Would you favor a state income tax?
Yes, and I've prime sponsored it before. I just said that a few minutes ago, Jim.
Right, but people change their minds.
The principle has not changed, that what we ought to be seeking is a fair tax system. I mean, the real question here of everybody is, do they think this tax system works? Does it work for small businesses? Does it work for low income people? Does it collect sufficient revenue for us to provide the basic services for our state to continue to be the engine of economic vitality that it can be?
Senator Liias, same quick questions for you. Do you favor a capital gains tax, and would you favor a state income tax?
Yes, I support capital gains tax, and I support a high earner income tax. I think, as I said in my answer, working people in the middle class pay more than their fair share. It's those at the very top that aren't paying their fair share. I support starting there.
Where would you start on that tax? What's a high income?
Somewhere in the $250,000, $400,000 range. I heard Vice President Biden say $400,000 at the federal level. I think that's a good place to start. You know, I think we got to look at the data and make sure that we're hitting just the top 1%, top 2% of taxpayers.
Okay, back to our 1 minute answers. And first question, this goes to Senator Liias. What legislation, if any, do you think is needed to address the revenue shortfall the state is likely to experience due to COVID-19?
Well, I think we really covered a lot of that in the previous answer. Because of our upside down tax system in this state, it means when we need critical public services funded, that's when we run out of revenue, because our system is so focused on consumption. When people aren't buying things, that's when our tax system is down. We've got to make sure that we're balancing that. And right now, all you have to do is look at the stock ticker and see that some of Washington's largest companies have made record amounts of gains on the stock market. That's why a capital gains tax, to ask those wealthiest Washingtonians to chip in, would make so much sense right now. So we need a tax system that responds to the economy. We also have to be honest that our business and occupation tax system is unfair to many businesses, to startups, to those on low margins. We've got to reform the way that tax is collected as well, so that as we're trying to build our way out into recovery, we're not taxing people in unfair ways that inhibit our growth.
Congressman Heck, what legislation do you think is needed to address the revenue shortfall from COVID-19? And if you could, is it all more revenue, or are there some budget cuts that you would expect?
Well, Jim, we know some things and we don't know some things. Right now, we think we know that the hole is about $4.4 billion between now and the end of the next biennium, but that's half of what it was 2 months ago. We also don't know whether the feds are going to come through with a package. I've leaned into that and will work until the day I turn the lights out in my office. The House has, in fact, passed several aid packages and, frankly, was negotiating against itself in an effort to get the president to the table. 2 weeks ago, he had 4 positions, literally 4 positions in 3 days. Now, the truth of the matter is that we ought to be looking to make every dollar go as far as it can. That's always a responsibility of state government. It's especially so during a recession, but we ought to be able to do that. I've suggested that the Lieutenant Governor's office can economize and participate in belt tightening, but we cannot balance this budget by cuts to the vulnerable or cuts to the institution that are going to grow it. But only after we see what the feds are going to provide are we going to know what the size of the hole is.
Senator Liias, in your rebuttal, if you could you address whether or not you think there are cuts that are going to have to come in the budget?
Well, I don't think we should begin with cuts. That's what we did in the last recession. I think we need to look at the state rainy day fund and fixing our tax code first. And if we do have to make cuts, I think we should use an equity and social justice lens. So look at policies of mass incarceration and places like that for efficiencies. I will say that the finger pointing at the federal level needs to stop. We need relief right now. I don't care if it was the president or the speaker, who didn't call who didn't call who when. We need relief right now. Small businesses and families are struggling. We need Congress to get their act in gear and get assistance to us now.
Congressman Heck, as Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to help our state reduce racial inequities?
I think that we have to acknowledge, first of all, that racism is systemic and that we've got to work across a whole series of platforms. I think what we ought to begin with is justice in policing. I'm a proud co-sponsor of the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act that passed the House of Representatives earlier, and I think that's a good place to start, but I don't think that we should end there, because we also have discrimination and a history of racism as it relates to access to jobs and education and healthcare, and especially as it relates to housing. We have structural racism in this country. And the proof of that is that the average net worth of a Black family is about 1/7 of a white family. The proof of that is that only 44% of Black families own their own homes and more than 70% of white families do. Housing is a good place to start, making sure there's no discrimination, making sure there's an adequate supply of affordable market-based housing that Black families can have access to, because it's the single largest tool of building net worth in this country is home equity.
Senator Liias, same question. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do to help the state reduce racial inequities?
I think we've absolutely got to address the racism that exists in our policing structures. The fact that Black Washingtonians have to live broadcast their police stops in order to feel safe while interacting with law enforcement is inhumane, and it shouldn't be happening in Washington in 2020. We've got to make some serious reforms there, and that means more transparency and more accountability by our law enforcement. We've also got to tackle policies like mass incarceration. Here in Washington, we have 4 times as many people in our prisons per capita as our neighbors to the north in British Columbia, and they're just as safe as we are. We are wasting a generation of Black and brown lives in our prisons, and we are wasting money on that. We've got to turn the corner on that. And we've got to also talk about healthcare disparities. We need universal single-payer healthcare so every single Washingtonian has access to healthcare, especially in the middle of this pandemic. While we've got an administration that's trying to take healthcare away from us, here in our state, we need to be ending health disparities by getting universal coverage to everyone.
Congressman Heck, you have 30 seconds to expand, expound, or rebut.
Well, thank you, Jim. People can tell by looking at me that I'm a white male, and as such, all the privileges associated thereto by virtue of my mere birth were attendant to my life's journey. But I do want people to know that this is personal with me. Our sons, both grown, are both adopted. One happens to be Black, and I've seen his life journey, and I've seen how, frankly, there are times when he was treated differently because of the color of his skin and for no other reason whatsoever. We're way overdue working on this problem and making meaningful progress.
Senator Liias, in your role as Lieutenant Governor, how would you work with the governor and the legislature to address homelessness and a shortage of affordable housing?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that the state government can do is to invest more in the Housing Trust Fund. Right now, we invest millions of dollars. We should be investing over $1 billion to make the critical investments we need. We also have to do more as state government to create this supportive environment, supportive housing, and a behavioral health system that work for people, so we don't push people into homelessness because of lack of access to healthcare and to behavioral health. The other piece that's critically important is remembering that we've got eviction policies and rent policies in our state that are also pushing people at the margins into housing instability. Right now, you can evict somebody in Washington for no good reason. We need a just cause eviction law that says you need to have a reason to kick somebody out of their home, not just because you feel like it. And we need to look at ways to keep the cost of rent from escalating year after year after year, pushing people into homelessness to begin with.
Congressman Heck, same question. As Lieutenant Governor, how would you work with the governor and the legislature to address homelessness and the shortage of affordable housing?
Well, first of all, we need to build more houses for all our neighbors of all kinds and sizes. We have a serious housing crisis in this country, more than 7 million housing units short of legitimate and eligible demand, and we have our share here in Washington State. So I agree with Senator Liias. I think we need to spend a whole lot more money through the State Housing Trust Fund. We also need to incentivize localities or municipalities to adopt zoning approaches that will enable for increased construction and density. I am the prime sponsor of the bill to do just that passed the US House earlier this year, because we're not building enough units. And if we don't allow for denser housing, we're going to get more sprawl and all the environmental deficiencies associated with that. So we need to do things at all levels of government. This is going to require the local government and the state government and the federal government all working in partnership to create sufficient housing to meet the needs of people, especially at the affordable housing level.
Senator Liias, you have 30 seconds for a rejoinder or a rebuttal. And if in that time you could use a few seconds to explain where you get $1 billion for affordable housing. That sounds like a lot of money in the capital budget.
Yeah, it's about prioritization, and it's also about going to the people with the need. The people under the Constitution have the authority to approve a bond measure for important investments like affordable housing. The bidding climate is low right now. We can get more for our money. The other thing I would say is, with all due respect to the congressman, he mentions no more tenant protections. If we build a ton more units without tenant protections, that means the developers make more money and people keep getting pushed into homelessness. We need eviction reform. We need to look at the rising costs of rent in this state so we're not building more units and pushing more people into homelessness.
Next question, which goes to Congressman Heck first. Many people are at risk of losing their health insurance should they become unemployed due to coronavirus. As Lieutenant Governor, what, if anything, do you suggest should be done about this?
Well, I will continue to advocate for the values I have since day one entering the United States Congress, which is to never give up in my support for extending health care to all Americans, quality health care, affordable health care. The way that I have done that thus far in Congress is to support expansion of the ACA, to support expansion of Medicaid at the state level, to support bills that would bring skyrocketing drug costs under control. At the state level, we need to robustly support our existing system, and we are bringing online the public option. I don't think that is a given at this point, even though it was enacted. There are questions to be answered, and it is going to require full-throated support on the people who are in a position to make a difference so that we can bring it online, so that we can finally achieve that which we need to, universal health care for all Americans. It's the right thing to do for them, and it's frankly the right thing to do for our economy so that it can function to its highest peak efficiency.
Senator Liias, same question. People are likely to be, who are unemployed due to the coronavirus, are likely to lose their health insurance. As Lieutenant Governor, what, if anything, would you do about this?
Yeah, we've got to break the linkage between employment and healthcare. We can't, in the middle of a pandemic, say people have to have a job in order to get coverage for healthcare. That's what got us into this mess to begin with. That's why we need a universal single payer model. It's why I support Medicare for All or the whole Washington initiative at the state level. Making incremental changes, as the congressman proposes, means that we continue existing disparities. Right now, the poor don't have access, and who is more likely to be poor? Our communities of color, our frontline workers, our farm workers. It's the people who are most exposed that are the most likely to have access right now. It's why we need a universal system. Anything else, any incremental steps short of that, just continue to perpetuate this broken system that we have right now. So I support the public option as an intermediate step. And while we realize a vision of truly universal health care for everybody around the state through a model that isn't based on employment, where everybody is covered.
Congressman Heck, your chance for a rebuttal. Are you going incrementalism with your plans for improving healthcare?
It's not incrementalism to advocate for that which will get us to the end goal as expeditiously as possible, while we may disagree about that path forward. Although I do think I need to point out that in the 5 years he's been in the Washington State Senate, Senator Liias has failed in every regard to co-sponsor the bill, which he now says he supports during the campaign. It has been introduced. He's not signed on to it, nor as the Senate floor leader has he taken any action to bring it out for a vote.
Now we move to the at the middle of the debate, we move to the questions from each candidate to the other. And we go first to the question that Congressman Heck sent me to ask Senator Liias. Now, remember, I'm reading your words, guys. So if I am if I sound a little abrupt or a little bit too soft, not my fault. Senator, I am not interested in using this opportunity to somehow try to embarrass you or your service, what we sometimes call a gotcha question. Voters are not well served by that, and in fact are pretty tired of it. So instead, let me ask you this. In your adult life, who has been the most influential person? Who is that one person to whom you would turn for advice or guidance before you make an important decision, and why? Senator Liias, you have a minute.
Well, first, I think asking questions about our records isn't a gotcha question, so I disagree with that premise. But I do appreciate the opportunity to talk about the people that are most important to me. I definitely would look to my parents. My mom, in particular, has been an incredible source of inspiration for me in my life. As I said, growing up, she was a lunch lady, and she's an immigrant to this country. And through her hard work and determination, I've had everything that I have in my life. So she is definitely the person that whenever I've got a big, tough decision to work through, she helps me think it through, and she gives me the right advice. And at the end of the day, it's all rooted in love and support, and that's what's most important.
Congressman Heck, you have 60 seconds.
I'm glad to hear that Senator Liias has those people in his life. And I know I don't have to tell him that he should treasure that for as long as he has it. I still miss my parents who have been gone 12 and 14 years, and you are blessed. I feel at this stage I've won the lottery. My life partner, my spouse, my best friend, Paula, is the one that I turn to. She is the highest emotional IQ and is the most neuroses-free human being I've ever met in my life. In some ways, we're incredibly well suited. She's a retired middle school teacher and principal, so she works well with me. Sometimes after a week of being in DC, maybe I spoke on the floor of the House or name drop alert, went to dinner with Chair Powell of the Fed. I come home and she greets me with those 4 magic words: take out the garbage. She keeps me humble, I would say, but anybody who claims to be humble isn't. But she keeps me centered and she keeps me grounded, and it is a blessing all the days of my life.
Okay, now I have a question from Senator Liias to Congressman Heck. Congressman, national media outlets have reported that you are leading an effort in Congress to bail out so-called commercial mortgage-backed securities, primarily to the benefit of large private equity companies. Can you explain why you are leading this effort while thousands of Washington families and businesses are struggling without federal relief? You have 60 seconds.
Well, I don't know if the senator is misinformed or deliberately misleading people. Frankly, again, I find this kind of cherry picking and taking out of context to be what voters are pretty turned off by. And no, national media outlets aren't reporting this. The truth is that up to 85% of our hotels are at risk of being in bankruptcy. And I had a conversation with the Fed about, among their many facilities they set up, could it be possible to have a facility that would enable them to prevent those hotels from going bankrupt if we conditioned it on helping the employees? And I'll tell him why I did that. I did that because when businesses go bankrupt and they're taken over by other people, you know who the first victims are? The unions that were represented. And that's what I was trying to do when I had the conversation. But there's been a bill introduced. I'm not a co-sponsor, and nor will I be, unless the employees are taken care of. And that's the fact.
Senator Liias, you have 60 seconds to respond, rebut.
Well, this is why Washingtonians are so frustrated with DC politics. It puts the wealthy few with connections ahead of everybody else. The media reports, and the Huffington Post wrote about it this summer, say the bailout would benefit $14 billion in loans held by hedge funds. Meanwhile, the Hotel Workers Union, Unite Here, says the money will not go to help workers. And Congressman Heck was the lead Democrat on the letter, and his Republican counterpart was bragging about how quickly they got folks to sign on to the letter because of all the lobbyist attention that it was attracting. This is the problem in Washington, D.C. We need to make sure that Washington, D.C. is getting relief to families, to small businesses who are struggling, not $14 billion in loans that are held by giant hedge funds and billionaires and big corporations. And then when you look at it, a couple of those hotel chains we'd be bailing out are major donors to the Trump campaign. These are the wrong people. They're not the folks who need help. It's Washington families who need help.
All right, time to go back to the questions submitted by the League of Women Voters. And this first question goes to Senator Liias. In your role as Lieutenant Governor, how would you work with the governor and the legislature to address mental health issues?
Well, Jim, this is front and center, one of the most important questions that we face in this moment. We know in the midst of this pandemic that more Washingtonians need access to mental health care than ever before. And even worse, we know once the pandemic is over, our experts tell us that's when the need will rise even further. So over the last few years, we've invested hundreds of millions of dollars more into building community-based mental health care services. We've got to dramatically expand that. We've also got to build a new state-of-the-art behavioral health hospital at the UW campus, and we've made plans to do that. And we have to lift up the mental health frontline workers who are providing these critical life-saving services. Right now, you have to get a master's degree to become a frontline mental health worker, and you get barely $20 an hour. We are paying poverty wages to folks who had to take on huge amounts of debt to serve the public. We need to lift those workers up, and we need to provide everybody in our state with community-based options where they live so that they can be healthy and strong in the pandemic and after it.
Congressman Heck, same question. In your role as Lieutenant Governor, how would you work with the governor and the legislature to address mental health issues?
Well, the truth of the matter is that most of the influence associated with being Lieutenant Governor is the informal use of power and influence, namely the bully pulpit and the gravitas of the office. This is a problem that's been a problem for a very long period of time. Ever since we deinstitutionalized, quote, end quote, mental health services by and large, we didn't provide the resources for them. And yes, it's a problem. I can remember even as far back as when I was Chief of Staff to Governor Gardner, working on the bill that established the regional delivery system. Last night I was on a phone call with a crisis health counselor up in Colville named Capri, who talked about the spike and increase in cases associated with domestic violence. The increase is going to come not in the future, but today, as a consequence of all the stress associated with it. And at the end of the day, most importantly, this is about resources. And I take you back to what I said earlier. The most important thing the legislature can do to deal with our budget situation is make sure that the vulnerable are provided for. And that includes those who are suffering from mental illness.
Senator Liias, 30 seconds to expand, rebut, rejoinder.
I will say the one thing I'm especially proud we did this session was to make sure that Washingtonians could access mental health care services via telehealth. So in the midst of this pandemic, for many thousands of Washingtonians, at least we've provided that one critical lifeline. But we need to make sure that folks in every corner of the state, and we've got counties in Eastern Washington where there are 0 or single-digit mental health providers in the entire county. We've got to make sure that everybody across the state has access to these services in their community. That means investing in the workers and in the facilities to get it done.
Congressman Heck, during a time of heightened polarization, which we are in right now, what role can the Lieutenant Governor play in building consensus for public policy actions?
An important one. Look, I don't think there's a soul in America who doesn't believe and whose heart is heavier at observing the degradation of civic discourse in this country. All you had to do is watch the first presidential debate to be treated to that. And the truth of the matter is, we can't function that way. It'll never enable us to solve the problems before us if all we're doing is screaming at one another. There are few people in a better position to set the tone, in the Senate at least, than the presiding officer. Yes, competently apply the rules, but also fairly and impartially, and in a way that inspires civility among the debate. Disagree like mad, argue tooth and nail over the substance of the policy, but never personally. When I got elected to Congress, I said, hold me responsible for 2 things. Number 1, never demonizing people with whom I disagree. And number 2, always looking for common ground. We seem to have lost that. And again, the consequence is we will be less able to solve all of these problems, be it climate change or racism, if we lose that altogether.
Senator Liias, same question. At this time of heightened polarization, what role can the Lieutenant Governor play in building consensus for public policy actions?
Well, growing up, our next door neighbor considered himself an arch Republican. So I learned from an early age that just because people may disagree on politics doesn't make them bad people. And our neighbor and I found a lot of common ground over the years as we had our discussions. I've tried to bring that spirit to my work in the Senate. I've worked across the aisle with Republican senators from Eastern and Western Washington to address big issues. We have passed the largest transportation investment in state history together. We passed the most progressive paid family and medical leave together, Democrats and Republicans. I'm proud of that proven bipartisan record. And with all due respect to anybody serving in Washington, D.C., we don't need more of the finger pointing in D.C. politics at our state capitol. Candidly, what we could use is a little bit more of the bipartisan spirit and the can-do attitude we see in Olympia back in the other Washington. So I hope that Congressman Heck in the next 90 days can show us that bipartisan spirit by getting us federal assistance, ending the finger pointing, getting Washington families the help they need right now.
Congressman Heck, 30 seconds to rebut, rejoin, and possibly answer whether or not you're somehow tainted by being in the other Washington for the last 8 years and somehow stuck with finger pointing as a standard operating procedure.
Well, there's no question that the political environment in Washington, D.C. is toxic, but the implication that I'm individually responsible for that, given my record of bipartisan passage of legislation, whether it's reverse mortgage reform to protect seniors or reauthorizing the family wage job creating export-import bank, obviously is just a swing and a miss in this regard. Look, I don't know who's talking to whom here, but when I talk to my neighbors, they're not very pleased with Washington, D.C., but they ain't all that pleased with Olympia either.
Following through it, maybe drilling down a bit on reducing polarization. One of your jobs, one of the big jobs, is to be chair of the Senate Rules Committee. So, how would you reduce polarization between the political parties there within the Senate on Senate rules as well as on the floor? And that, I believe, goes first to Senator Liias.
Well, I think on the Senate Rules Committee, we see a very collegial atmosphere. I think that there is a bipartisan spirit that pervades there, even though there are occasional disagreements. I think that we see a collegial spirit across the aisle there. I would say on the Senate floor, I will do what I've done as our majority floor leader, which is have a strong and vigorous debate where everyone's point of view is heard, and then move forward with a vote and implement whatever the policy is that the majority wants to pass. We have had incredibly detailed and vigorous debates on big issues from clean energy to transportation, like I said, to paid family and medical leave. And we've heard all the perspectives that are out there, had a vigorous discussion, entertained amendments and all sorts of ideas to improve legislation. And then we vote and then we move forward together. The one thing I will say is I will be strong in ensuring that members don't impugn one another on the Senate floor or impugn the governor or other statewide officials. We've seen the tone starting to creep where a little bit of that DC politics is coming into our rhetoric on the Senate floor. I'll stand up to it and make sure we focus on the issues, not the personalities.
Congressman Heck, same question. What will you do to reduce polarization in one of your key roles, the Senate Rules Committee, any polarization between the political parties there and on the floor of the Senate?
In my first term in Congress, I was a member of a congressional delegation visiting the war theater in Afghanistan. One night at dinner, I found myself sitting 2 chairs away from another member, the head of our delegation, with whom I disagreed on just about everything as best as I could tell. You would recognize this person, maybe not by name. He's the one who yelled, "You lie," during the President's State of the Union, Joe Wilson from South Carolina. During a break, I sidled over to him and I said, "Joe, we don't agree on much, but we're not leaving this dinner table till you and I find something that we can work on together." And we did. And I might add, to successful conclusion. Very important to Washington State, the family wage job creating export-import bank to help us sell airplanes. And the fact of the matter is that you cannot find common ground unless you look for it. My dad always used to say, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means God intended for you to be listening twice as often as he intended you to be talking. And I think that's oftentimes what's not missing here, that we just don't listen to one another.
Senator Liias, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal, rejoinder, expansion, or even a good aphorism from your dad.
Well, I think the Export-Import Bank is a great example. Of course, Republicans and Democrats in DC can come together when it benefits giant corporations, but where's that spirit when it comes to extending unemployment benefits for people who need it right now? So I appreciate that Boeing got the help they needed from Congressman Heck's work. I wish that the Boeing workers who are going to lose their jobs when Boeing shifts its jobs to South Carolina got the same assistance in getting unemployment benefits passed. So I'm hoping he can reach out to Joe Wilson or whoever else he needs to get a bipartisan agreement to get the help flowing to Washington families right now, not just to the big corporations.
Congressman Heck, let's stay on the Boeing theme for just a minute. I'm going to call an audible here because this isn't on my sheet, but their questions may have been prepared before the Boeing announcement. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do in a similar situation where Boeing or another major company came and said they're closing down an important line and possibly even one that the state had offered extensive help in order to get it to land it here?
So favorable tax considerations, such as were extended to the company, should never be extended unless they are contingent upon taking care of the people who work there. And oh, by the way, the benefit of the Export-Import Bank isn't just the Boeing Corporation, but the many thousands of machinists who work there, which, by the way, may be why they endorsed my candidacy. And also all of the small metal fabricating shops in the supply chain, thousands of them. This is about jobs, and they're generally about family wage jobs to protect people. But no, I don't believe that we should be giving favorable tax consideration to people unless they're willing to invest in the community and in the employees who actually work there. They're the vitality of our communities. They're our neighbors. They're our friends.
Senator Liias, same question. As Lieutenant Governor, what would you do about a situation like the recent Boeing announcement that they are pulling out a line out of Everett, and it's a line for which they were given significant amounts of state aid and assistance to land?
Well, I'll just say at the outset, Boeing company came to us at the beginning of the year and said, because of our tax policy, we risked European tariffs, and we broke speed records to get a solution to that, to act in good faith and to show that we were partners in helping build aerospace into the future. And then they turn around and reward us for that partnership by moving jobs to an anti-union, low-wage state. That is insulting. They have turned their backs on all of the good faith and effort we have put in. I strongly support Governor Inslee's line that if they're going to turn their backs on us, then we need to revisit everything that we have promised to them. It is clear that they can't be trusted. We have shown time after time after time that we will be good partners, and time after time after time, they have betrayed their workers here, and they have turned their back on the state of Washington. This isn't about the aerospace workers on the ground. They're incredible. They can build the best airplanes in the world. I think it's time for the company to get the message that they need to be better partners to their workers and to the state.
Congressman Heck, 30 seconds for rebuttal or rejoinder, and would you address what you would say to Boeing for their decision to move that line to South Carolina?
Well, I already said it publicly. If this decision were based on merit, they would build the airplanes here. The safety records of the machinists who make the airplanes in our state is far superior to that of North Carolina. I do think it's interesting to note, however, that as long as Boeing's tax circumstance was opened up in the last legislative session, that there was no effort to insert language that would assure that which happened would not happen. In fact, they had a perfect opportunity to do it while the legislation was coursing its way through the veins of the legislature, but they didn't.
Back to the league questions here. Democracy depends on open and transparent government. How can Senate processes be made more transparent so that voters will know what their representatives are doing on their behalf? For example, what rules would you propose to be enacted or repealed or amended? And I believe that goes first to Senator Liias.
Well, thanks, Jim. I'm proud since we took over the Democratic majority in 2017 that we have already set about changing the Senate rules to provide more transparency. When we took over, there was no requirement that the public see the budget before the members of the Senate voted on it. Now there's a mandatory budget review period so that every member of the public, all the folks who are out there following the budget discussions, the members of the news media and others have at least a day. And I'd like to see that increased to more time to review the budget. We also, at that time, weren't subject to public records law. And I was one of the first senators who voluntarily complied with the Public Records Act to ensure that the public has access to my records and to all of our records in the Senate. Beyond that, I'm excited for the 2021 session. It is an opportunity to use technology just like what we're using right here, right now, to give more Washingtonians a voice into the legislative process. We are going to get more voices, more perspectives, more Washingtonians engaged than ever before, and I look forward to making that happen.
Congressman Heck, again, same question. Democracy depends on open and transparent government. So how can Senate processes be made more transparent so voters will know what their representatives and senators are doing? And what rules would you propose to be enacted, repealed, or amended?
Well, first of all, Jim, I'm proud of my record of advocating for transparency. I would, in all modesty, suggest to you that the development of TVW was one of the greatest advances in transparency of the legislative process in our state's history. And I am the proud recipient of the James Madison Open Government Award as granted by the Coalition for Open Government in this state. I think there's a lot of work that we can and should always look to do. One area in which I think ought to be object of particular attention are title-only bills, where we introduce bills that have title only, and then at the very last minute, we jam a bunch of stuff onto them, and they're not subject to the same kind of vetting, the same kind of winding their way through the legislative process as the rest of the bills do. And I think it's interesting to note that, notwithstanding Senator Liias's comment, that he actually voted in favor of the bill that every newspaper in this state editorialized against as it related to disclosure of the records of individual members of senators. And only later did he change his mind.
Senator Liias, you have 30 seconds to rebut or rejoin. And could you address in that time the whole question of title-only bills, which are basically repositories for things that are going to be shoved quickly through the legislature, usually in the last 48 to 72 hours of the session?
Well, it is a little bit ironic. When Denny was majority leader in the state house, was the biennium that they had the most title-onlys ever introduced in state history. So I guess he was before he was against it. I don't know how the phrase goes. I think we do need more transparency into how those title-onlys are handled. It's one of the reasons we added a rule in the Senate this year that every single bill must receive a public hearing in order to be considered on the Senate floor, so that every bill, no matter what the title was when it was introduced, must be heard in a committee so the public has a chance to weigh in. That's transparency we added this year. The House hasn't done that. I want to expand that and ensure that there's more transparency into all bills, including title-only bills.
Okay. Now we have a question from a reader, Mike Zetterberg. Mike asks, newspaper editorial boards are endorsing based on the assumption that Governor Jay Inslee will vacate the governor's position for a cabinet position should Joe Biden be elected president. How has this affected your planning for the work of the lieutenant governor? Are we voting for a backup governor or the president of officer to preside over the Senate? And I believe that goes first to Congressman Heck.
Well, we're voting for both because it's always the case constitutionally that the lieutenant governor would become governor should there be a vacancy that occurs. I thought long and hard about whether or not I would want to run for lieutenant governor based on that series of dominoes. The job I want is lieutenant governor. But if that should come to pass, I'm ready to embrace my duty. I'm prepared for it. As a former chief of staff, I know full well what that job entails, better than most people. In fact, better than anybody who hasn't actually held the job before. But I also made clear at the beginning that I would not run for re-election as governor should that be the case in November of 21. And the reason is important. We have these triple crises of the COVID, the economic recession, and the budget shortfall. And I believe that whomever is governor in January must devote all their time and attention and effort to solving those problems and working with the legislature to solve them. Furthermore, I think the voters of the state deserve to know whether or not that would be the intention of somebody who runs for lieutenant governor and would become governor.
Senator Liias, again, the question deals with the hypothetical of Governor Inslee. First, the hypothetical that he is reelected. Second, the hypothetical that Joe Biden is elected president, and then President Biden would call then Governor Inslee for a cabinet position. Now, I realize this is hypothetical, and y'all hate hypothetical questions, but how has this affected your planning for the work of the Lieutenant Governor, Senator Liias? And are we voting for a backup governor, or are we voting for someone to preside over the Senate and handle some other positions?
Well, I think one thing is clear. The only reason my opponent's running is to be the governor. He wrote his memoirs 3 years ago and said he was never running for anything ever again. He was done with public service. And then this armchair parloring began about who's going to become the next governor. I think it's really clear. Denny Heck wants to be our next governor. And if he wants that, he should have run for governor. He's also the least qualified candidate to be president of the Senate, has never served in the Senate for a day. The only time I've seen him in my 6 years in the Senate was when he came by to receive his resolution for retiring for Congress. So I am running based on my leadership in the Senate, based on having been our Senate Majority Floor Leader for the last 3 years, based on the fact that I know the institution and the rules and the way to make change there. Denny's running to be governor. That's great. He should have run in that race. I'm running to do the people's work as a strong, bold, progressive leader as our next president of the Senate and lieutenant governor.
Congressman Heck, you have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
I am categorically, unequivocally not going to run for re-election as governor if this chain of dominoes should occur. And if you don't believe me, ask she who must be obeyed, that life partner and spouse of mine with whom I have partnered for 44 years. It's been made abundantly clear that that's simply not going to happen. And no matter how many times the senator says it, it is simply not true. It is categorically untrue.
I'm going to call an audible here and ask Senator Liias, if those hypotheticals come to pass, would you run for governor in November of 2021?
Well, I'll just start by saying that she who must be named in the memoirs said that he was never running for anything ever again. So it turns out there's some sort of appeal procedure, and that's why he's running through this back door to try and be our next governor. I don't think Governor Inslee will leave. So I think Congressman Heck will be stuck in a job he didn't want. I'm excited to be the next lieutenant governor to build on my track record in the Senate of proven bipartisan leadership, getting stuff done. That's the job I want. I don't think the armchair quarterbacking or parlor games are going to happen. Governor Inslee's going to be here. We're going to serve together, rebuild the economy from COVID-19, and build forward together. That's why I'm running. That's the job I want. That's what I'm focused on with laser-like precision.
But you didn't answer the question of would you run in 2021?
There will be no election in 2021. So I won't run in 2021 because Governor Inslee will be here as our governor. He has said that repeatedly, time after time when pressed. So no, I won't run in 2021 because there won't be a governor's election in 2021. I will be lieutenant governor. Governor Inslee will be serving here, making COVID recovery happen, making green economy happen, working forward for the state.
Okay, I'm going to, another audible, I'm going to give Congressman Heck 15 seconds here to add anything that he wants to add, because we have about that much that we can throw in here.
He didn't answer the question. I did.
Okay. The final question, the lieutenant governor's job has a lot of ancillary duties that are not well known to the public, service on boards and commissions. Is there one position that you think is particularly important and you would spend more time on than the current occupant? Is there one position that you think the state should do away with or pass off to somebody other than the lieutenant governor? And I believe that this question goes first to Senator Liias.
Yeah, well, I would say the position I'm most excited to take up, in addition to being chair of the Senate Rules Committee, is chairing the Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations. And I won't contrast to Lieutenant Governor Habib. He's done an excellent job in that role. I look forward to carrying on in that regard and focusing in on the critical issues to our competitiveness. It's why I support a Green New Deal. This is an opportunity to create jobs in clean energy and clean technology and address the COVID-19 recovery in a way that builds back better than we are right now. In terms of what positions or what committees should be eliminated, just this year, we actually eliminated a couple committees and realigned some. So I don't think that there are others that I would ask to step off of. I think that the work on the Healthcare Facilities Financing Committee, the Higher Ed Facilities Financing Committee, the State Finance Commission are important roles that I look forward to participating in. But the one I'm most excited about is how can we create thousands of new, green, clean jobs across Washington from the vantage point of the Joint Committee on Economic Development.
Congressman Heck, the position other than presiding over the Senate that the Lieutenant Governor has that you're most looking forward to, and one that you think the state could do away with or at least pass on to somebody else?
Senator Liias and I are in complete agreement. I am so excited about the prospect of chairing the bicameral bipartisan Legislative Committee on Economic Development and International Relations. It is a prime reason why I want to be Lieutenant Governor, to bring to bear my experience in the private sector, having grown jobs in a successful company, and especially in the context of a tough economic recession, where we do have an opportunity to build the economy back better than before in a way that more broadly shares prosperity and in a way that is more environmentally benign. There are all manner of, for example, infrastructure issues that can be dealt with in that committee, rural broadband, housing, because housing is infrastructure, stormwater runoff, and yes, the traditional ones like roads and bridges. These are all things that need to have a spotlight shined on them and need to have advocacy and need to have a focal point for bringing members of both political parties and both chambers together to get the job done for Washington's citizens.
Well, since you agreed on the most important position there, and you don't seem to disagree on getting rid of anything, I'm going to call another audible, and we're going to move to the final 30-second closing statements based on the coin flip. Senator Liias, you go first with your closing statement.
Well, thanks, Jim. Thanks to the spokesman, to the League of Women Voters. I'm Marko Liias, a lifelong Washingtonian, state senator, and college professor running to be our next lieutenant governor. And the reason I'm running is because this is a moment when we need big, bold, transformational changes in our state. We need to get healthcare to everyone. We need to ensure everyone has access to education. The best way to do that is by electing a proven, progressive, bipartisan leader from Olympia, not a career DC politician who can't even deliver relief to people in this critical moment. I'm asking for everyone's support.
Congressman Heck, you have the final closing statement.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, League of Women Voters. Thank you, Spokesman-Review. I would encourage everybody to visit our website, www.dennyheck.com. Take a look at the organizations who have honored me by their support. It's now more than 110. Thus far, every single daily newspaper in the state that has endorsed us, including the senator's own hometown newspaper, I might add. Nearly 300 current and former local and state elected officials, including Governors Gregoire and Locke and longtime former serving Lieutenant Governor Owen. Thank you very much. I'd be honored by your support.
Gentlemen, thank you for your time tonight. Thanks to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this debate. We can't shake hands at the end of the debate, so give each other a high five. And that's it for the League of Women Voters Lieutenant Governor's debate.
Thank you for informing yourself about the candidates. The League is proud to be nonpartisan, neither supporting nor opposing candidates or political parties at any level of government, always working on vital issues of concern to members and the public. Our main goal is to make democracy work. The State League sponsors the statewide candidate forums and debates, and our 20 local leagues, made up of 2,400 members, produce local election forums. This is the centennial year for both the League and the 19th Amendment, which recognized women's right to vote. It took more years for all women and men to actually secure the vote. Although our name contains the word women, the League is open to all men and women 16 and older, and our purpose is to make sure voters understand issues and candidates. The League has two organizations: the education arm that presents candidate forums and debates across the state. It is our impartiality and our history as a trusted organization that gives us this privilege. The education arm, through the League's Vote 411 website, provides candidate information. It is different from the guide you receive from the Secretary of State's office because it is the only resource that covers every race in Washington. The League doesn't tell you how to vote, but it ensures you have enough information to be confident about your vote. The other is the advocacy arm that promotes public policy in Olympia through about a dozen volunteer lobbyists. We are grateful to our partner, the Spokesman-Review, and our local co-sponsors who have joined us in soliciting questions from voters for these programs. You can get a copy of your vote at lwv.org. It has detailed information about elections, descriptions of elected official offices, what to listen for in a debate or forum, and elections that have been won or lost over a single vote. You can also access Vote 411 on lwv.org.